Hello, everybody. Welcome to class. It's March 17th where I am, but you will probably watch this on March 18th instead of having class. So obviously we can't have the discussion part of class without getting really creative. So I'm just going to leave that out. So this video will be a little shorter than most of our classes usually are. That being said, we have a lot of material to cover, so let's get started. This is what we did last time. We talked about the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. We also talked about the Buddha's life, which we can discuss. I'll cover that as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page. The Buddha's teachings are going to be new today, and that's mostly what we'll cover after the life of the Buddha. And then we'll talk a bit about the Buddhist community next week. And you'll have a short writing assignment. I'm still finalizing that. I'll send it to you later this afternoon. It'll be based on the podcast, sort of like last time. I want to make it a bit more creative. I feel like I have an idea. So, anyways, I'll flesh that out and I'll send it to you all this afternoon. So, Life of the Buddha. This is where we got to last time. There's a prophecy that the Buddha would either be a universal emperor or a great religious teacher. He sees the four signs, otherwise known as the four sights, which we discussed last time. I should have written this. Maybe I'll write it out for you now. It's not too late because we're not going to watch this clip. And so, what are they? It's an old person, it's a sick person, dead person, and a holy person, right? And so, these are the things that the Buddha saw. As we discussed before, he was sheltered. He was a sheltered prince, and he had never seen the suffering of old age, sickness, and death before. So it was very disturbing to him. And as we talked about in class, it's sort of, it's a way for us to think about how do we experience suffering in our own lives, right? When old age, sickness, and death, when they come to our door, how do we respond? Do we let it in and think about it, or do we sort of push it away, just like the Buddha's father did for him? And so it's a strange story. The concept that the young Buddha, Prince Siddhartha, would have never seen these things is frankly absurd. But again, I think it forces us to think about how do we experience death, for example. You try not to think about it, right? And in fact, as a society, we've all agreed, like, let's kind of keep this away, right? You don't find dead bodies out in the open, and when it does happen, very rarely when it does happen, people call the cops, right? No, you can't have that in public, but at the same time, it's coming, right? It's coming for us all. So even though it's not allowed in sort of the public space and in polite society, right? If you go to parties and start talking about death, you probably won't be the most popular person at the party. The Buddha wasn't trying to be popular, though, right? This is something he wanted to explore for himself, to know more about. And we talked last time, why a holy person? What's that doing there? And I think what we agreed is seeing someone who knew about these truths but could still come to terms with them and be at peace with them, right? Someone who is not afraid of death is really a remarkable person. And the Buddha wanted to see what this person had to teach. So what did he do? He went out in the woods. He practiced asceticism. This is an important word. It's extreme discipline and avoidance of indulgence. There were hints at asceticism in the Ramayana, right? When Rama went out into the woods, he was also a prince. He was also a very special man, just like the Buddha. And so you could argue that these two stories are actually quite related. And so when Rama went out into the woods, he also had experiences of asceticism, right? That was sort of his initial first part of the book, was getting cast out of the kingdom and experiencing asceticism. The Buddha, of course, leaves of his own accord. So if we compare the two, it is pretty interesting. Rama accepts his duty and is willing to undergo asceticism because his father asked him to. The Buddha, on the other hand, is seeking something, right? He gives up his position as a prince on purpose, and he's looking for some sort of truth through the practice of asceticism. And So what comes from this conversation, I've posed them mostly as questions. This is something I was going to ask you guys to discuss today, but of course, I have this appointment I have to go to tomorrow. Um, why is he doing this? What is he looking for? And rather than let you puzzle over it, maybe I'll give you a few seconds to puzzle over at home. What is he doing? What's he trying to achieve? Why is he so skinny? What happened to him? He had a sense that if we attach to our bodies, and there might be something familiar about this. This is another interesting side of asceticism, is even though we don't think of our society as particularly ascetic, there are sides of it that are really quite ascetic, right? We sacrifice a lot, we work very hard. I know a lot of you are probably struggling with this question of how hard do I want to work, right? But Americans work very hard. I think modern society forces us to work very hard. And unfortunately, we're very rarely satisfied with all the work that we do because there's always more that you could do, right? It's never enough. And so we're almost forced into this ascetic existence. And I would argue that this has a lot to do with our sense of dissatisfaction, right? The sort of discussions we had before about success and happiness and how those have kind of become intertwined. There's an asceticism that gets involved in it, where if we kind of grit our teeth and work really hard, maybe we'll get what we're really looking for in life or something like that. That is a message that is sent to us. There's also, in the case of the Buddha, there's a sense that sensual pleasure is a problem. We talked about pleasure before. So in the three aims of life, one story I forced you guys to think about on the exam was this pursuit of duty and ignoring pursuit of pleasure, and how somebody gets cursed for that. Remember, the king gets cursed for that. And so that's basically what we see the Buddha experimenting with here. He's thinking, what if I don't pursue any of that stuff, right? What if I don't pursue my duty? Because think about it, what is his duty? Is to be the king, and he doesn't want to pursue that. What would success be for him is to be a successful king, right? And to conquer his neighbors and that sort of stuff. What would be pleasurable for him would be to stay at home and continue enjoying the pleasures of life. He gives up all of those things. So what is he really doing here? It's kind of that fourth aim that Wendy Doniger was talking about, which we didn't really explore very much because we were saving it for this part of the class. It's transcendence. Transcendence. So maybe I can fill in some of these answers here again. Why did the Buddha practice asceticism? I would say very simple, transcendence. So what is he trying to transcend? Well, we could say it's attachment to his own body, right? It's the sense pleasures, desire for food, desire for, let's say, touch, right? The company of others, desire for relationships, also just like good times, good music, good friends, all that sort of stuff. All of these things are associated with our body and how we live and experience our body. So the Buddha decides he wants to transcend these desires, to the point that he gives up eating, right? Because eating could be a source of one of these desires, right? He gives up all forms of desire to the point that he almost dies. And you can see him here, right? He does not look very well, does he? You can't even see his stomach, or I guess you can if you squint, and it's really disturbing to look at. So he becomes very emaciated, right? Almost to the point of death. And so what the takeaway is from the story of the Buddha, especially if we kind of take it as a whole, he's a young prince. He's living a very comfortable life, a life of indulgence, we could say. Then he tries the other extreme, right? So one extreme is a very comfortable life because his father made it so comfortable for him, right? Then there's this other extreme, extreme asceticism. And I hate to bring up uncomfortable topics, but these are things that happen in our lives. We go through periods of extreme indulgence where we binge eat, or we binge drink, or we binge on Netflix or whatever. We binge something, and then we have to really grind it out and sort of get our work done and this sort of thing. And we bounce back and forth between these two extremes of too much indulgence and then too much asceticism to make up for it, and then kind of going back and forth. And I don't pretend like I'm immune to this, right? This is my life too. I've actually had a very busy week. In addition to this dentist appointment, I've had a bunch of other things I got to do. So I'm here too. I've been going back and forth between sort of an ascetic week. I hope I can binge on something this weekend. No, I won't binge on anything. But that balance, that the importance of that balance that we talked about before is easy to lose. And the life story of the Buddha is an illustration of that, right? He had a very comfortable beginning to his life, very purposefully, let's say, disciplined second part of his life. And the main message, the main takeaway is the middle way. So you can see that there, right? I gave you a page number. So what is the middle way? It's the middle way between hedonism and asceticism, the middle way between indulgence and discipline. You could use any of those terms. They're synonyms. I think you probably get the point by now. So if you kind of zoom out and look at the life story of the Buddha, this is the big message, right? Is to find a middle way between too much indulgence and too much discipline. And I think the power of it is it's pretty loose, right? You decide, you have to decide what is too much. What is too much indulgence? Is one beer too much? Probably not. Is 4 or 5? You might be moving in that direction, right? And so you gotta, again, you have to figure this out for yourself. Eventually, by practicing this middle way, the way the story goes, the Buddha achieves nirvana and enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, where he remembers his past lives. He has clairvoyance. He eradicates negative emotions. I have a video clip of Keanu Reeves achieving enlightenment. Maybe I'll show it to you next time when we're reviewing. I think right now it'd be less interesting. And then he spends the rest of his life developing this community of monks and nuns and lay people who follow him. So this is the Sangha. If we go back, right, Buddha Dharma Sangha. So he develops the Buddhist community. So this is the Buddha's life. Very simply put, he's a prince. He finds this middle way. He practices the middle way. He achieves enlightenment. And then finally, in the latter part of his life, he develops the Buddhist community. So maybe, like I said, we can return to this enlightenment moment. It's sort of an interesting one, and we can watch the video clip together next time. I think if I showed it now, this video would get flagged for copyright, which it's always annoying when that happens. So let's just avoid that. So okay, and then the Buddha dies, right? So just like Jesus, for example, his death is important and it's celebrated in the Buddhist tradition. We didn't actually hear about Rama's death. The story sort of cuts off. I don't think in the longer version there's a big scene with his death, actually. So that's kind of an interesting comparison. The Buddha, why does he have to die? Well, one reason is one of his main teachings is impermanence. So we've got impermanence there. These are the Buddha's final words, in fact. As he is dying, he tells his followers, decay is inherent in all things. Be sure to strive with clarity of mind for enlightenment, for nirvana. And so there are really two parts to this, and it's again worth thinking about. This is something I'm going to ask you about when we come back together again. Why is impermanence so important to Buddhism? Is this emphasis on decay? Is it true that all things are going to decay? All things fall apart? Are all things going to disappear one day? And frankly, the answer is yes. Maybe you could think of something sort of abstract like space, right? Space exists seemingly permanently, but even with space, it changes in terms of its qualities. Like we can fill space, we can empty space. Time is the same. Maybe you could argue time is forever, but time also changes, right? Every moment, after every passing moment, time is also transforming. So when he says all things, he's referring to all compounded things. That's the technical term. All phenomena, all stuff that comes together, everything that's composed of parts will break down into parts. And of course, this is one of the laws of thermodynamics, right? Is that entropy is a fact. States of order move towards states of disorder. I don't know if there's a good explanation for why that happens. I'm sure somebody somewhere has come up with one, but I don't know what it is. But what I do know is that is an observed fact of the universe, right? Is that states of order do move towards states of disorder, including us, right? So when the Buddha's dying, he's illustrating this point that we will all die one day, right? It's not only him who's sort of coming to terms with this truth. We all must come to terms with this truth. So that's his the first part of his final teaching. The second part is a little more confusing. Strive with clarity of mind. So that one is worth thinking about. What does he mean when he says strive with clarity of mind? And maybe I won't answer that question for you. I'll let you think about it. And again, you can tell me the next time we see each other. Um, okay, so that sets us up for the next topic. These are the Buddha's teachings. Now we're finished with the life story of the Buddha. The Buddha had a lot of teachings. I've got quite a few slides lined up. It's already been almost 20 minutes, and let's try to go for about 20 more. So if we don't get through everything in like 45 or 50 minutes, I think then this video will get too long and I'll lose your attention. So I'll try to keep it pretty brief and pretty short, and we can cover anything I missed when we meet together next time. So karma, you've probably heard of karma before. We often use karma in our society to refer to things like, I don't know, let's say I say something bad about someone or I take something from someone and then immediately something bad happens to me, right? Instant karma. I'm sure you've heard this sort of explanation before where, and if you look it up on the internet, actually, you know what is a good example? Maybe we'll even discuss it. Trump getting COVID, right? People called that karma. And why is it karma? Well, actually, a few ways is he basically was saying the disease is not that big of a deal. It's not even really real. It's just like a flu. It's going to go away by Easter. Remember those naive days 1 year ago where like, oh yeah, it'll be gone by Easter, and one more Easter later, it's still around. So, anyways, you know, those again were more hopeful times, and of course, Trump never really let go of that hope, or what eventually became kind of a delusion, until he himself got sick, right? And so people kind of made fun of him and called it karma and that sort of thing. And that is one meaning of karma, is where if you know, belittle the coronavirus and then get the coronavirus, there is something that feels sort of karmic about that. But it's not only this, and this is, you know, this is something I want to emphasize for this class, is because I think it presents a model of action that is actually kind of limited. So here's a quote from the Buddha. It is choice, O monks, that are called karma, having chosen one acts through body, speech, or mind. Choice, you probably can understand. It refers to moral choices. You can choose to do good things. You can choose to do bad things. And so that is what karma is all about. You can choose to be an adult and deal with the coronavirus in a responsible way, or you can choose to be a fool and pretend like it's not going to hurt us. And so here he had a choice, right? And so he was acting through his speech really most actively. I guess texting is almost an act of your body, but let's call that one speech. The question I have for you, and here's another question we can return to together, is what does it mean to act with your mind? Now, I know a lot of you are probably thinking, you act with your mind by thinking and then acting with your body, but that is not what I asked you. I'm asking you, how do you act with your mind? What's an example of acting with your mind? I should start writing these questions down, and I'll bring them to class next time. Maybe I'll answer this one for you. How do you act with your mind? You act with your mind by thinking. Period. Thinking is acting. So what do I mean by that? When you think in a certain way, you will be more likely to think in that way. If, let's say, you get nervous about things, maybe talking to people makes you nervous, right? And so if I am getting ready, here's an example. I'm getting ready to get my hair cut. I have to sort of psych myself up to talk to the barber. And so I think, okay, people make me nervous. And when I think people make me nervous, it makes me more nervous. And when I get more nervous, then I just start acting like a nervous person. Then I become a nervous person. So I'm going to have this nervous sort of encounter with the barber, right? Have you guys ever had this sort of experience before? It doesn't have to be about being nervous, but it just goes to show, what seems to be your character, your personality is actually just a composite of many different habits that we have within our mental actions, right? Within our minds and the way in which we act with our minds. That being said, is it easy to change these sorts of habits? No, it's not. Is it impossible to change these sorts of habits? I would say also no. I think it is possible. And in fact, that is the whole point of Buddhism, is to change the way that you act, particularly with your mind, but also with your body and your speech. So another way of putting it, sow an act, reap a habit, sow a habit, reap a character, sow a character, reap a destiny. And this language of sowing and reaping is, of course, um, agricultural. Maybe you have seen this word SOW pronounced sow, which is, of course, a female pig. This is not sow, this is a verb. This is sow. You sow a seed. And so by sowing a seed, you then reap the fruit of that seed. And that is the metaphor that's being created here, is by acting in a certain way, you will experience the consequences of that action, which will be a propensity to make that same sort of action again. And if we go back, this idea of striving with clarity of mind, that's exactly what the Buddha is talking about, right? Is trying to have a clear sense of how these habits are formed, and then to actively form, positive habits, salubrious habits, healthy habits, habits that are wholesome, that will do good things, that will give you what you want, right? Because we screw ourselves all the time by getting in trouble and doing a bunch of stupid stuff. Just because we're not thinking, right? We're not thinking about these sorts of habits. So the Buddha is encouraging us to think. Okay, there are bad actions, good actions, merit. Uh, this should be pretty clear. A lot of it comes down to your motivation. If you're motivated by greed and hatred and delusion and all these sorts of bad things, then you will get bad karma. You already know that, right? Good things, you get good karma. There's another word for good karma, which is merit. One thing you maybe didn't think about, this is another side to karma that we often miss, is rebirth. So I would argue karma only makes sense in the context of rebirth. Why is that? Well, again, we see all these fools all around us making mistakes all the time, being jerks and being exploitative, right? All of these horrible people who are, I don't know, making other people work very hard and taking all the money themselves. Actually, there's a very similar sort of situation in this slide. Can I get my mouse going? Yeah. Um, so up here are the gods. They're the most comfortable ones. It's Vishnu and his pals, right? So we've met the gods before. Here they are chilling. I guess let's make it zoomed in, playing some music, hanging out on the patio, right? They got some fruit trees. They're enjoying the fruit from the trees. They got this special tree over here. And you might notice, oh, that's like an army. What are they doing? Oh, they're fighting a war with those guys. And the reason for this is these guys planted this tree, right? They did all the work. And they're the ones who created the fruits that are at the top. And the gods at the top are enjoying the fruits of these other people's labor. Who are they? They are the asuras. They're the demons. Now Kyon calls them titans, which is fine. They're just the enemies of the gods, right? But again, this is Ravana's people. We've met them too, haven't we? So in a Buddhist context, we've got, the demons, Ravana, the asuras, Asurpanaka, then we've got the gods, and then we've got the humans. In addition to that, there are animals. We've also seen some animals, the monkeys, right? These we haven't seen. We got hell. We talked a bit about hell, but let's look at hell. Very uncomfortable. Can you tell what's going on? Here's some burning hells. That should be pretty familiar. But here's some cold hells. Ooh, sharp rock hells. There's lots of people getting like dismembered and boiled and horrible stuff. So that's really bad stuff. And then these ghosts. Can you tell what's up with them? So they got these fat bellies and little necks, and they're always thirsty and always hungry, and they're basically unable to get enough to eat or enough to drink. They always want more. So this hell, if we kind of zoom out now, we can think this is basically organized according to suffering, where hell is the most obvious suffering. The hungry ghosts are suffering because they're hungry and thirsty. The gods are suffering the least. They're having a pretty good time, and everybody else is sort of in the middle. So we can also discuss this when we get together again next time. Okay, so samsara, cyclic existence. So that's the name for this wheel. Here's the wheel zoomed out even more. The six realms are those six types of beings, and where those six types of beings go, the six realms. You want to get a better rebirth, which, as we discussed, comes from good karma. How do you get good karma? Is by making positive moral choices. How do you learn to do that? Like the Buddha said, it's to pay attention, right? One thing to keep in mind too is that each one of these lives is impermanent. So you're not, even if you become a god, you're not going to be a god forever. That's an important development in Buddhism. We often think heaven and hell are permanent, right? You have one life, YOLO, and then you're going to go to heaven or hell. Buddhists think about it very differently. And again, because there are multiple lives here, karma makes more sense. If I'm a jerk in this life, I might not see the consequences until my next life, right? And it could be even worse. I could become an animal or a bug or a ghost or some other horrible thing, right? And so no one's really safe. Whereas I feel like the lack of obvious consequences for less than moral behavior gives people a sense like, oh, I can get away with whatever I want, right? So the Buddhists kind of try to snuff that out by introducing this karmic idea. Um, there's a sense that being human is good, and again, from oh yeah, my mouse isn't showing up. Oh, can it? No, it can't. I'll just leave it. So from kind of the Buddhist middle way perspective, being a human is good because it's not too much suffering. It's also not too much pleasure. It's sort of right in the middle. And humans are smarter than animals, and so we have a sense of kind of where we are and what's happening to us, and so we can actually control our destiny to a certain degree. Again, by following that Buddha's advice from his final words, by paying attention, right? Paying attention to what's happening in the world around us. And if you take it really far, you get amazing things like scientific laws and technology and all that sort of stuff. Many of the great things that happen in our lives came from people paying attention at one point. And now it is up to us, according to this, to pay attention to kind of a moral way of being, right? How do we act in the world? What sort of impact do we have? How do we affect other people? How do other people affect us? What do we want to do? How do we want to affect people? And how can we achieve those goals, right? All of these sorts of thoughts, we could say, are part of this program. So rebirth and karma are very connected ideas, right? I would argue without rebirth, karma, again, doesn't make any sense. Even though people try to sort of shoehorn it into American culture, I would say no. You know, that's basically just a veiled way of talking about God, right? God will punish you, or God will reward you, or something like that. We just don't like to talk about God anymore, so we say it's the universe, or what goes around comes around, as if that makes any sense at all. Of course, it does not make any sense, because look around you, right? All these jerks are in power, and all these nice people are being exploited, right? That is not how the world works, not at least in this lifetime, right? If you expand it to multiple lifetimes, maybe it makes sense. But you basically have to ignore the facts of reality in order to believe in karma in just one life. That's my take, at least. Um, okay, like I said, I want to wrap this up in maybe 10 more minutes, 15. So let's do a quick overview of the Four Noble Truths. Yeah, maybe we'll get through all these. I don't know. We'll see. Four Noble Truths, they're the main Buddhist teachings. After he achieves enlightenment, this is his message, right? So it's a big deal. His first teaching was the Four Noble Truths. And we've been sort of hinting at it all along. His major realization is that all things are composed of parts, including ourselves, and therefore we decay into parts, right? Impermanence. And again, I hate to say it, but this is a fact. We don't always see it as a fact, but it is a fact that you are composed of parts and you will decay into parts. from dust to dust, something like that, right? Um, so negative emotions are also a problem. They sort of obscure our understanding of this, right? So why don't I see things as composed of parts? Why don't I see myself as composed of parts? It's because I happen to like myself the way I am, right? I don't want to fall down into parts because then that's gonna hurt and I'm gonna get old and all the other problems of falling apart. And so this we could say agreed to exist in a certain way, agreed to have delicious things, delicious foods to eat, and that sort of stuff. It makes us not remember, makes us not be able to see the way things really are. And what the Buddha wants us to do here, to see things as they are. He talks about how birth is suffering. This is a quote from the Buddha. Sickness is suffering, old age is suffering, death is suffering, pain, grief, sorrow, lamentation, despair is suffering. Association with what is pleasant is unpleasant is suffering. Dissociation for what is pleasant is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In short, the 5 factors of individuality are suffering. I'll expand on this next time. Maybe what I'll try to do is just introduce these ideas, and then we'll come back to them. So what does it mean to say that the first noble truth is the truth of suffering? Is to see, just like the Buddha saw, is to see sickness, old age, death, to really see, to feel it, to say, okay, this is a real thing that happens in our lives, right? Because without that starting point, we're just still stuck in the castle, right? Without those 4 sights, the Buddha would have never left home. So the first step is to see the suffering in our lives. Very simply put, suffering. Number 2, you got to think, where does it come from, right? If it's composed of parts, let's say, if it arises, comes into reality based on other factors, what are those factors? Well, let's check it out. So it's these negative desires. We could call it thirst, we could call it craving. Remember, the Buddha's life is a life of a middle way, right? So he's not saying all desires are bad. This is an important point. Not all desires are bad. Some desires are good, in fact. You can see at the bottom, wholesome desires are good. So how do you differentiate the two? Again, that's part of the program. You have to figure it out. Wrong desires restrict and fetter. Right desires enhance and liberate. Didn't we talk about how love liberates? It does not bind. I would argue that sometimes what we call love can also restrict and fetter. And so this is something, again, I'm still learning how to do, right? It's how do you love and also liberate at the same time. That's why I shared that video with you last time. I found it very inspiring. So we have these desires, right? Many of them are unwholesome. They cause us problems. And again, it's not saying all desires are bad, but some of them cause us problems. Sensual pleasure is a big one. Eat delicious things, feel good, just have a good time, right? We just want to be comfortable. But thirst for existence, wanting something to exist, wanting something to not exist, if you hate something and sort of pushing it away, these are also, they can cause problems for us. This is sort of a philosophical idea. Let's come back. I'm getting tired of doing this lecture. It's more fun when you guys are there. I can tell you're paying attention or something. Why don't we skip this? And the Buddha achieves enlightenment. Like I said, I have a video for you of Keanu Reeves achieving enlightenment, so we can go over this together. There are different kinds of enlightenment. One is what you achieve in this life. So the Buddha was about 35 years old. As you can see, Keanu's young and handsome here. The end of greed, hatred, and ignorance. And so that is in the middle of his life. And then he lives to a very old age of 80 years old, and that's when he finally dies. And that would be his final nirvana. So what happens in between? Well, because of karma, he's committing acts before he achieves enlightenment. He achieves enlightenment. After that, he does not create new karma. The karmic wheel is coming to slow down. It doesn't quite stop yet. And then when he finally reaches the age of 80, passes away, and he is gone. He's gone from cyclic existence. The end of suffering, right? You can see at the top, cessation. Nirvana is the cessation of craving, withdrawal from it, renunciation of it, rejection of it, liberation from it, non-attachment to it. It's the end of craving, and therefore the end of suffering. Finally, the path. This is the Eightfold Path, which is pretty famous. Maybe you've heard of it before. I'm not going to make you memorize the Eightfold Path, but it is important to know that this is the fourth noble truth, which I do want you to memorize. So, suffering, origins or arising of suffering, cessation or ending suffering, and then finally the path that leads to the end of suffering. And the Eightfold Path is this path, right? It's a middle way in all of these different aspects of our lives. You could break these 8 down into 3 general categories of wisdom, morality, meditation, right? You could live a good life, learn how to meditate well, have the right understanding of things, the right resolve, the right approach to life. So those are the 4 noble truths. I thought that was going to take longer than it did, but I did kind of zoom through them. So why don't we call it a day? I'm done with the slides. And when we get back together, we can go through some of these same ideas just very quickly. I can answer any questions you have, and then we can move on to the next material. Okay, so that is all. If you made it to the end of this video, I commend you. Link, comment, subscribe. No, like, comment, subscribe. Isn't that what they say? Okay, so no, I'm not serious about that. But I'll have a good weekend. I think it's gonna rain all day tomorrow, so try to stay dry. And I'll see you guys on Monday. All right.